The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. It is the Wednesday edition of the Nerdcast News Report for Wednesday, March the 19th, 2025. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. And we are talking a little bit of everything today, but nothing really too big as far as news items on this Wednesday here at the midweek. We've got a potential new anime venture from a couple of companies working together. Some news on the top manga sellers of 2024 here in the U.S. and some unsurprising news about PC gamers that we'll talk about. Then we'll wrap things up with the Empire Express to bring your Wednesday edition to a close. Joining me in studio on this Wednesday morning is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. Yeah, you know, the Aniplex Crunchyroll news is certainly interesting. I'll be anxious to see what comes out of that. Yeah, otherwise, just knocking out a bunch of winter anime, getting ready for the spring season, and yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, like I said, it's nothing like really earth-shattering, I don't think, but this whole Crunchyroll Aniplex thing is at the very least interesting to see where it ends up going, and that's where we're going to start our news podcast for today, and it is this new venture between Crunchyroll and Aniplex, a new partnership as far as anime goes. It was announced actually by Deadline on March 17th. That was back on Monday. And there you see the logo for their new company if you're watching on Twitch or on YouTube. And it is a company that both Aniplex and Crunchyroll have jointly invested in. And there will be employees from both companies that will be involved in this new venture called Hayate. I think, you know, this could end up being perfectly fine. I think it's way too early to even begin to speculate on what exactly this is going to mean. However, because Crunchyroll has not necessarily been a beacon of high quality or good news, I think there is always a healthy dose of skepticism anytime they are involved in something. And I think, you know, Aniplex does have a reputation of being pretty high quality stuff, a lot of really high quality shows. So I think, you know, what this is going to end up being is still, you know, obviously very early in the process to even begin to know. But it unfortunately, because especially on the Crunchyroll side, it just feels like every news story about these guys has been at the very least neutral and in some cases very negative. I think everybody maybe takes a little bit of a pause anytime they're involved more directly again with another anime studio.
Yeah, you know, I think first and foremost, my thought here is like, it goes to show you just how large of an entity Sony is. Where you basically have two companies that are owned by the same company that have to announce this formal thing that says, hey, we're working together. Like this, we have to create an entirely new entity within that overall giant umbrella to say, hey, this is now a thing. I think from the Aniplex's side, I guess maybe working closer with Crunchyroll is good as far as Western distribution goes. Yeah. I mean, obviously, they're running the biggest website that sells anime. They're running one of the top streaming sites for viewing anime. But to me, that's really all they have going for them. I feel like everything else you hear out of them, and it's funny because in the press release they talk about Crunchyroll have built these strong ties with the anime community and passionate fandom throughout the years. And it's like, man, like, I feel like every new announcement you hear from Crunchyroll just draws more ire from the public. So, and funny enough, even in this press release, when you question some of the quality that's been churned out by Crunchyroll, you even have the chairman and CEO, Masanori Miyake, his name incorrect in the press release. So, yeah, I don't... You hope that at the end of the day, you don't notice much of a difference with whatever's turned out by this new entity. I think the more you feel that there's something there, it's probably not going to be positive.
Well, and that the whole press release thing, these big corporate releases tend to go through lots of layers. There's, so you have some low-level PR person that types it up, and then it goes up the chain. Everybody's got to sign off on, despite the fact it was a pretty short release and there wasn't really a whole lot of detail. So you had very little to get right in this thing, and somehow they still got it wrong in the story that was posted on Crunchyroll side. If you look at the Deadline article, his name is correct, and it matches what you see elsewhere online. And it kind of feels like par for the course for Crunchyroll. You hate to be too critical, but I mean, it's been a year of just kind of one misstep after another, and poor quality on their subtitles. Now the newest thing, which we haven't really even gotten into real heavily, is kind of confirmation that their video uploads are coming through at a lower quality, and some of that you understand because data transmission is very expensive, and clearly you want to try to find that sweet spot between giving people a high quality stream and being able to afford to give people a high quality stream, because that stuff's not getting any cheaper. But at the same time, in an era where physical releases become more and more rare, when your streaming quality goes down, it just continues to pile on. And now you're partnering with, again, another company under your umbrella, but another company that's kind of known for not giving you affordable physical releases. So for those of us who do like to collect physical anime, I don't have real high hopes about what this new company is going to give me as far as home distribution.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking to like the quality of the video, my concern is that when you run into issues like that, your first thought is someone is making the decision saying, well, it's just anime.
Yeah.
Like that's how you fall on, well, the quality isn't that important. It's not, streaming sports where you want it in 4K and 120 hertz. It's just anime. And I hope that's not kind of the overriding sentiment that they have. I'm still having audio issues with Crunchyroll where sometimes the audio just becomes really quiet and picks back up again. There's all sorts of issues with what's going on the Crunchyroll side of things. And, for a long time, I was someone who thought that the people who turn to piracy when they talk about it being a better experience were just trying to justify illegal activity. But the more you watch on Crunchyroll, a recent show I've been watching, it's like they can't even bother to translate on-screen text when that's a really large part of the communication between characters. I think somewhere along the lines they stopped focusing on what's going to deliver the best experience for the user. And even though I'm generally vehemently against piracy, I understand the allure.
Well, and it's no coincidence to me that all of a sudden we're having this new push. They're talking about federal legislation to go after these pirate websites. It's like you're now giving me a worse legitimate experience, and you're going to go after the illegal sites. Like, those two things feel like they're related in some way.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. Now, I still say good luck getting the pirate sites, because those guys always tend to stay a step or two ahead, and there are going to be countries that are not going to work with you as far as extradition and things like that. You can have internet. What they want is for internet companies to just censor those sites. But to me, that's a slippery slope when you have the government or somebody deciding what websites you can't go to, because, starts out with anime piracy sites, and who knows where it goes from there. Not to put my tinfoil hat on, but, again.
No, that's fair in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, but it's, it's one of those things that, the average person doesn't really care, so they don't. It's a story that's kind of going to blow by them, but at some point it will affect them. They just don't even realize it yet. And again, we've kind of branched off from this partnership, but again, it kind of goes back to the whole, paying more for a worse experience.
Yeah,
and that feels like a trend when it comes to streaming media and a lot of things that are subscription based. Back in the old days, back in my day, when you just bought something and you owned it, you bought it for better or worse, and the experience you got was the experience you got. We talk about a ton in video games. But
it's going to keep coming up. It isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, and it just, it's one of those things, once you start having to rent things, then they feel like they can give you a worse experience at first or a worse experience later, and it's incredibly frustrating. And, at some point, it's going to break. At some point, people are just going to be like, I'm just not going to do this anymore because I'm not going to spend what little extra money I have on an inferior product when I know we can have it better. And you're going to slowly choke out the industry. And it's a shame.
Exactly. And my other concern here is that I don't want Sony here in America or Crunchyroll to gain a larger stake in terms of the actual production of anime.
Yeah.
I don't want them making the creative decisions. I think we've seen that, and you can also throw this out to the video game side of things, that they can't really be trusted to deliver a product that the majority, the average connoisseur, I suppose, wants to digest. It kind of reminds me of the story recently about Masahiro Sakurai, the creator of Kirby, coming out and saying, hey, I want to see a trend where Japanese companies just go back to making Japanese products, because we've seen over the years, back as far as the 80s and 90s with gaming and anime, there is a market for stuff that feels uniquely Japanese in the West. You don't have to say, oh, so you guys like that? Let's change it and make it something totally different. You have a stable amount of the market share by just producing what you know and love that people over here know and love as well. Let's not murky things up. Let's not try to fix something that isn't broken.
Yeah, and that's when you start getting more worldwide money involved, especially money from the U.S. This is, what ends up happening is that you get opinions from over there, because obviously if they're spending all that money, they want their input heard, and they want to try to make every last dollar off of a property, but in the end they oftentimes make something that nobody wants.
Well, and we've seen it just in the business world in general, when companies buy companies and don't realize what made the company they bought worth buying.
Yeah, for sure. I certainly work for a company like that, and thankfully don't work for them anymore, but and again, kind of jumped around a little bit, but the Crunchyroll thing is just something that you just have to keep a close eye on, and this partnership, this venture, I shouldn't say partnership because they're kind of already partners, but this venture is something that we'll just keep an eye on and see what they produce. Again, very few details from this release, so I think the jury's still out on what exactly this is going to look like once it's all finished. A couple other news stories today, and this from CBR.com, and evidently Berserk's still doing very well. Chris, I know, not with us this morning, but I know he'll be very pleased to hear that the Berserk manga has laid claim to the best-selling manga here in the U.S., manga volume in 2024. And this article lists the top volumes, and certainly a theme when you look at this, Berserk and Jujutsu Kaisen doing very well. One Piece, Demon Slayer, Spy Family, Uzumaki doing well as well. My Hero Academia holding on there, but there are a couple shows that really dominate this market, and I guess I'm not totally surprised, but it really speaks to the quality, evidently, of these manga that people are just scooping this stuff up here in 2020 or back in 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Berserk is something that's always done really well over here, and I think this probably just speaks to an even greater of influx of people getting into manga, where there are enough new fans that haven't checked it out yet. I saw in the article they mentioned that they're kind of re-releasing it in like 3-in-1 volumes. So obviously Berserk Deluxe Volume 1 is a little larger than your typical just manga volume, but still, I would love to see the sales numbers of these compared to what domestic comic books are doing, because you look at this and these are original shows that aren't rehashed of the same characters over and over again. My Hero Academia was brand new when it came out. This isn't, My Hero Academia starring the one superhero that was created back in 1950. Like they don't really do that as much. I mean, there are instances of it, but your heavy hitters in Japan and manga, and that clearly also now sell over here, are original properties each time. There are always new manga being created that even if maybe some of the plot lines might be derivative, they're still brand new characters. Whereas I feel like in the West, we've really struggled over the years with creating new iconic characters. Like at the end of the day, it's still Marvel, DC, it's still Superman, it's Batman, it's the X-Men, it's Spider-Man. Manga never really felt like it followed that trend, and I think they're kind of seeing the rewards from that now.
I mean, you look at this list, it's almost all new stuff. I mean, new characters, new shows, new IP, if you will, when they were created. Chainsaw Man was certainly the hot property of a couple of years ago, still doing really well. One Piece, I mean, they're doing omnibus editions of One Piece as well, and people jumping into that. Demon Slayer, obviously, very, very much a unique property. Spy Family. The other thing, too, that jumps out at you is, again, you kind of talked about the whole, creating things that people in Japan would like. These are all shows that, also are all manga that really speak to the American audience, and they have good crossover ability.
Yeah.
That they're stories that aren't necessarily. I mean, some of them are like Demon Slayer, obviously, pretty Japanese, but it's proof that you can create these stories like One Piece that is obviously very Japanese anime, but it is also something that really could take place anywhere on the open seas, and it can be done and done in a way that doesn't sacrifice kind of what makes manga and anime great. And I think, to the other point, you mentioned all the American characters. I think it also has hurt the American cartoon market because you don't have those new properties to create new cartoons out of. Whereas, there's no end of the amount of manga out there. We see it every quarter when we have the new anime come out, and there's all these shows that have either been light novels or manga, sometimes original stories, but mostly from some sort of derivative print edition of the show or of the property. And that's why the anime industry is so strong, because there's no end to the amount of anime that can be adapted.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case over here. And because of that, it just does, either your cartoons are geared towards kids and specifically, or, you do have some adult, Family Guy and cartoons like that are clearly geared toward a regular audience, but it just feels like the volume and the amount of cartoons you could have are significantly less than what you're getting out of Japan.
Yeah, I think you can kind of think of the examples where it's worked over here, and there are so few, it's pretty quick to rattle them off. You think of something like when they created X-Men 97 a year or so ago, and it kind of spoke to that 90s cartoon that was really popular, and it ran its course. They fired the showrunner like right before it aired, I think. It was kind of a mess, but that was popular. You do have like you mentioned, cartoons for kids. Like there are several Marvel properties that they've made into children's cartoons that seem to be doing pretty well, but all in all, they don't have the kind of infrastructure that manga and anime seem to have. And I think it's wild thinking about it from like a historical perspective that so many of these titles feel like they're the cool thing now. Like you never really felt that way about anime 20 years ago, that these are all the really cool things that people want to consume. But you look at Chainsaw Man, that's undoubtedly a cool property. So is JJK, so is Demon Slayer. I think they've really come a long way in normalizing what manga and anime are, and the fact that this many people are not even just watching anime but reading manga, that's really impressive.
And even something like One Piece, like I said, that is more than 20 years old. We're going to talk again in the Empire about the Empire Express about another crossover here in the States with One Piece.
Yeah.
So that show is stronger than ever, and we've got the reboot, if you will, of that coming up soon. So yeah, I mean, super popular IPs, and the manga of them are doing very, very well here in the States. And Berserk at the top of the list. Like I said, Chris will certainly be happy to hear about that. One last story today before we get to the Empire Express, and again, this may be the least surprising story we've reported on in the months that we have done this news podcast. PC gamers like old games. I mean, we've talked about it a ton. 67% of player hours are spent on games at least 6 years old, that according to Game Rant. Steam has reached over 40 million concurrent users. An increase in PC gaming, 907 plus million PC gamers in 2024, up from 873.5 million. But again, I don't think any of those numbers are really surprising as console gaming becomes a little less popular. And, there are several reasons for that. But we're getting more people on their PCs, and those people are playing games that have been out for many years. I mean, I still spend a lot of hours on Heroes of Might and Magic 3, and that game's been out forever.
Yeah.
And I don't see it changing anytime soon. The retro gaming market, especially on PCs, even on consoles, but especially on PCs, seems to be hotter than ever.
Yeah, there was a story back in December that CBR covered that highlighted the results of the Steam year in review, which mirrored a lot of what you're seeing in this article. As far as back then, the Steam year in review showed that 47% of time played on games was spent on games 1 to 7 years old, 37% on games more than 7 years old. I think you're seeing a couple things. I think part of it is as console makers have shifted toward digital, there's really no difference now between playing on your Xbox or your PC. Mm-hmm. So why not move over to Steam, where I have this giant repository of every game I could possibly play in one location? The convenience alone makes it hard to not do. I think also gaming companies, when they started making that shift to trying to create live service games that would stand the test of time and that people would keep playing, they kind of almost did it too well out of the gates, and people are looking at these older games like your Fortnite, your Dota 2, Roblox, League of Legends, and they're not making anything to usurp those games. And now you're competing with not only the quality of those games, which even as they age, people are still getting fun out of them, but people also have put hours into them. There's now sentimental value to those games, and that the gaming industry, as they struggle to kind of find out what their current identity is, they're trying to create games to replace those that appeal to a smaller audience instead of going the other way around. They're kind of reaping what they've sown up to this point. As far as you created games that people want to play, that's on you. If you can't make something that entices people more, that's a skill issue.
Well, and I mean, you think of a game like Minecraft. Like, people still stream that game like crazy. And that's the other side to it, too, is so many of those older games make for perfect Twitch content because, not all of them are low impact, but you have a lot that are kind of low impact or work really well with the streaming environment that you can kind of get your chat involved with. And, I feel like that's where you see a lot of the new games being played right now are game developers, smaller game developers in most cases, coming up with new versions of those types of games, realizing like, hey, let's market toward the Twitch streamers because everybody wants to be a Twitch streamer. I mean, that's what we're doing right now.
I think you also see that those games don't have the same type of PC requirements that certainly new triple and quote unquote quadruple A games may have. I don't think people want to keep doing the hamster wheel of replacing PC components and upgrading when they can still have fun playing Fortnite and Minecraft. Like, Minecraft you could probably run on smart refrigerators. So, why bother when ultimately, and it's interesting, the article from December kind of pointed out that PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, generally the top 10 games were all games that were 7 years old. Nintendo's top games averaged 3.9 years old.
Yeah.
So again, you have the company who kind of slow played the technological advancements and prioritized fun, and as a result, people play newer Nintendo games on average more than they play newer games on PC, Xbox, or PlayStation.
Yeah, and like I said, there will always be a market for really well done new big games. You think of Elden Ring, stuff like that, where it's like if you really knock it out of the park, people will play it. People will upgrade their PC for it or whatever they have to do. But for the average person who maybe doesn't have more than 10 or 15 hours a week to game, you don't want to have to go buy another $2,000 PC or more to play whatever the newest game is, like you said, I'll just, pull it up on my flip phone and play Minecraft. Like, you're appealing to the what is the actual average consumer, which is the person who works 40 hours a week, who, has kids, who has, whatever it may be, that they don't have the time to sit and game all day. They just want to sit down and have a couple hours of fun to wind down in the evening. And these are a lot of those old games that people are still gravitating toward.
But it's also kind of telling, too, as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of Chrono Trigger.
Yeah.
I think there are more people out there clamoring for an HD 2D remake than like a full-on 3D multi-game, Final Fantasy VII remake treatment for it. I think people would rather still play a fairly stripped-down game that just takes you back to that world, has that story, and is fun.
And again, that nostalgia of remembering when you played it the first time, and those good feelings that go with that also have a big part in that as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, just something, not a shock, but just some interesting stats to pass along about PC gamers. Ready to wrap this thing up?
Let's go.
It's the Empire Express. We wrap up with 5 more news articles to quickly talk about. Starting out with the Kings of Thrash, featuring David Ellefson and Jeff Young, have announced tour dates for the summer and fall, including a date at the King of Clubs in Columbus. That is a show worth seeing.
Maybe. I mean, this is basically like seeing a Dave Mustaine tribute band. Looking at some of their set lists before, they're playing a lot of old Megadeth stuff off the first couple albums. It's weird considering I feel like every story involving Jeff Young was him kind of trashing Mustaine, so it's weird to think he's now touring off of Dave Mustaine's work, but hey, it could still be kind of fun to check out. The One Piece MLB collabs are continuing as Toei Animation has announced a collaboration with the Seattle Mariners. Seems like it's only a matter of time before the Reds get involved, right?
I mean, the Reds literally have a boat in their outfield. Like, why would you not actually put the Jolly Roger up on the boat in center field? Like, to me, that is the most logical crossover between One Piece and an MLB team. Maybe that'll happen sometime soon. In more concert news, Live and Collective Soul have announced a 2025 co-headlining summer tour, including a stop in the Dayton suburb of Huber Heights. Is that a concert worth putting on your calendar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this would be a tremendous show. These are 2 bands that kind of hit their stride in the early to mid 90s and were amazing. Live's Throwing Copper album is an all-time classic. Collective Soul's first 3 albums are awesome. I would totally get into seeing this live, and I hope a lot of people feel that way too. A tournament to crown the first WWE ID champion will begin in Las Vegas during WrestleMania weekend, with matches at the Collective events GCW and FSW. This feels like the next logical step for both WWE and their affiliated indie promotions, right?
Yeah, and I feel like this is going to allow these indies to take their shows to another level. You mentioned yesterday that it wouldn't surprise me that in a couple of years from now, these indies might be running bigger buildings for WrestleMania weekend based off of their partnership with WWE. And I know some people won't be happy about that, and it is kind of funny, ironically, that WWE and GCW, of all things, are in some sort of partnership. But, that's the wrestling world in 2025. Finally, an interesting story I came across late last night. Team MJM has announced they will launch / Signal, I believe is what it is, an occultic role-playing game that is an official authorized spinoff from the anime Serial Experiments Lain. It will launch on Steam and the itch.io services on April 3rd. With a limited CD-ROM edition available. A little surprising they're making Lane spinoffs.
Yeah, so this is wild. It's apparently a sequel to the PS1 game that came out back in 1998 and is the result of a 2018 NBC Universal open source project called Lane Time to Live, where they basically allowed residents in Japan to create their own derivative products based on Lane. It's a really fascinating IP, and I think with modern gaming, you could do some really cool kind of AR, VR stuff with it, so it could definitely be worth giving a look to.
Yeah, this is something to keep an eye on. I feel like Lane is an interesting property. It's obviously a very well-respected anime from the late 90s, and this could actually be something that's really cool, something we'll definitely keep an eye on in the days and weeks to come. But that is going to wrap things up for this edition of the Nerdcast News Report. You are all caught up on your nerdy news for this Wednesday. We'll be back on Friday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time to wrap up the week in the Nerdcast News Report. And then we'll be back on Sunday, 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time with the Hard Rock Empire. The music of March the 7th will be on the docket for this Sunday. Big thanks to everybody for joining us. Big thanks to Mike in the studio. And a big thanks to you for listening whenever and wherever you're listening. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media as well for their continued support. We'll be back again on Friday with another edition of the Nerdcast News Report. Until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.